Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 86, as requested by our present level patron, Matt. He is requesting, once again, one of his theme episodes. We love Matt's themes. And this time it is support systems in comics, specifically related to rehabilitation of villains. So kind of a broad topic, kind of a very interesting topic. We're going to get into that in just a sec. But as we always like to start with a little bit of housekeeping. First off, we have another brand new patron, longtime, not just friend of the show, but good personal friend of both mine and Doc. Our friend Dan is a patron of the show. And so thank you, Dan. I thought I'd spend a little bit of money on your show. Since I'm saving money, not decorating my house, and keeping my office with the aesthetic of a bombed out refrigerator.
Wow, you really went in with the inside joke there. Okay.
I was going to say that joke is only going to it's only going to be understood by about 3 people, but all 3 of them are laughing their ass off right now. So that's all I care about.
Well, you would think that, and yet your description in the mockery was actually very clear about what he was doing. So
yeah. To explain for the 99% of you that don't get the joke, our friend Dan, we video chat every week when we play our weekly poker game, and it's all play money, I swear. And he streams from an office in which the walls are completely bare. Like, they just bought the house not that long ago, but he's like, "Oh, we're working on all these other things. We've got all this other stuff going on." So it's like, yeah, okay, but Dan, like, put some decorations up on the wall behind you so it doesn't look like you're in like a padded room. It's funny. And of course we love Dan. I mean, he was a groomsman in both of our weddings. I conducted, I performed his ceremony when he got married. We've known him. I've known him as long as I've known Doc. We went to high school together. So he's a good friend. We do love him, but can't let him go without busting his chops just a little bit. So segueing from the ball busting to something a little more serious, but in a very, very good way. I just want to give a shout out to one of our fans, Jacob, a newish fan, who sent us this amazing message on Instagram. And he said, "Your podcast helped me get through some really shitty times in the last couple of weeks. I'm just wrapping up my undergrad degree in psychology, and I want to do something with addiction. And Doc's way of speaking about psychiatry and practicing has genuinely reaffirmed why I wanted to take this path. When I didn't really feel like studying for my exams, I'd find an episode where you examined a character with said disorders or behaviors I was being tested on." And so Jacob is also looking to start a podcast of his own. So naturally, I offered some assistance. He wants to do sort of what we do, but he wants to cover more anime-like characters. And so I said Doc would be all about that. I said, because I don't know anime at all, but Doc, I know that's much more in his wheelhouse. So,
everything from the sublime to the ridiculous, like bo 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 bo, or some of the more serious things like Now and Then.
Mr. Baseman.
Oh, boy.
I really think I'm with it.
Yeah, or Now and Then, Here and There, which is the English translation because I can't even say the Japanese version. But yeah, there's plenty. Oh, man.
I think the only anime I've ever watched was Pokemon.
Which is fine. Younger. It's fine. Not knocking it.
I have a familiarity with some of the anime. And I know that recent episode of DuckTales that we were talking about where there were numerous anime references. I was like, okay, I know Lupin 3. I know Astro Boy. Yep. I get the general vibe of the aesthetic. I just don't know anything more than that because that's all I know through the zeitgeist.
All right.
But in any case, Jacob, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Messages like that are what really help us keep going. Not that we need the help, but it just gives us that boost to just make us feel so much better about why we do what we do. So thank you sincerely for your very, very kind words, and best of luck. I hope you get all the awesome grades in your undergrad, and congratulations on finishing up your degree. And when you go into grad school, if there's ever anything that you need, shoot us a message, and we'll be glad to help with that, the podcast, or anything else, because it gives us the warm and fuzzies.
Yep, amen to that.
Last, since we're following on this, let's read what we have. A couple of new reviews. So one of the reviews left on iTunes, a 5-star review from EmeraldGod, who is also now in our Discord. So shout out to him. Doc and Anthony break down superheroes to a level that makes you go, things that make you go, I can't help it. They allow us to dive into the minds of characters to not only reveal a little bit about the character and how they see the world, but they also open them up and show us how we can make them more relevant and real. In a world full of would-be icons, this show helps bring modern-day mythologies upfront and personal. Thanks, guys, for a great show. I am hooked. So
always wonderful to feel appreciated, but always wonderful to actually create some impact. That's even better.
I mean, we say all the time, that's one of the reasons why we do this show, is to open up that conversation, to destigmatize these discussions, and to help folks think about what it is that goes on in their life and how they can become better, how you all can become better people, and how we can become better people. I know I certainly feel like I've grown and matured and learned so much throughout the course of doing this show. And I can only hope that we continue to have that kind of impact on our listeners as we progress and move forward, bigger and better things. And stay tuned for all of you who enjoy this show. We've really got, fingers crossed, we've got some really good stuff coming down the pike that we hope we can announce in the relatively near future. So all very, very good things. But in any event, let's get started on the actual show itself. So as we said, this is Support Systems in Comics, and Matt wants us to talk about villains that have gone good and attempts to rehabilitate villains that have not worked out. So we can examine what the differences are between the success stories and I hesitate to use the word failure because I don't want to look at it like that, but things that didn't go as intended. And then when we get into where we would normally discuss treatment, we can discuss some of the corollaries to address recidivism in the real world. And I know that that's something that we discussed talking about with the Mental Health Avengers for maybe the next episode or a future episode, but we can sort of pinpoint it just a little bit for this episode and just look at, like I said, the villains that have gone good, and then also maybe sometimes some heroes went not so good. And so I think there's a couple of famous examples of villains that have gone good. So we'll start with that. And the three that pop into my mind, and I was trying to not show favoritism to one publisher or another, though I'm much more familiar with the Marvel characters. I want to throw in some DC characters as well. So you've got Emma Frost, Hawkeye, and Plastic Man. The Hawkeye we did already, although we did only do the Matt Fraction run, but we have covered that character. And so if you want to know a little bit more about Hawkeye and what he's gone through, you can go back and listen to that episode. But Hawkeye started off as a villain, and he ended up being recruited into the Avengers by Black Widow, who was herself a villain turned hero. Emma Frost was allied with the Hellfire Club and I believe also the Brotherhood of Mutants, and has since then become one of the leaders, the many leaders of the X-Men team, although her methods still tend to skew a little bit more towards the, shall we say, pragmatic rather than the overly heroic.
Brutal.
And then Plastic Man, who again started off as a small-time crook and then has become one of the, I guess, like a B-list. I think maybe even calling a B-list is being generous.
No, that's fair, because I think he gets the B for longevity, no pun intended. Just the fact that if you look at any JLA run or just any major event, like, he'll be there in the background. Never be a main player, but always somewhere.
Yeah. So those are three characters that, like I said, right off the bat come to my mind. And those are all success stories as far as villain rehabilitation. So I guess let's start with that and talk about what some of the things are that have made those transitions stick.
I think part of the reason why you can call them successes is that they were consistent. This wasn't a situation where, at least let's start with Plastic Man, because I think it's the simplest example. He got an immediate and instant gratification after he developed these powers by the classic trope of, I believe it was chemicals or something like that, got dumped on him. So potentially horrible, negative situation on top of already being a crook. I think he was I apologize, I'm doing this from memory. I think he was like a burglar, safe cracker or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah, petty thief.
Okay. Petty thief.
Not unlike Scott Lang, who we can also discuss.
There you go. Okay. But the point is, okay, so you're already on that track and you have something even more negative and in theory horrific happen to you. And you would think that would just continue along that same track. That, if one negative happens and another negative happens, usually it compounds upon itself without any other intervention per se. But because of the fact that there were some dire circumstances that he was able to fix and he was able to help out, he got the idea that, even if that wasn't my original intention, there was a positive result. And that brings up the question, can that be done again? Is that just a fluke?
Well, I was going to say he also, he sought out a monk. Mm-hmm. So it was one of those situations akin to, say, like a Doctor Strange, where it's an old trope and borderline racist where, I'm going to go and receive counsel from a wise monk of typically Asian descent and learn from them, and the whole, mighty whitey white savior type storyline doesn't quite go to that extent for Plastic Man, but just the whole notion that, I'm going to learn these Asian mysticism, etc. And then that will teach me to become a great hero.
Yeah.
So that was part of his backstory, because again, this was written in the 40s, I think, was his origin when he was created. Yeah. So you have to take into account what was going on in the world at the time and the view of how things were. Not saying it's right, just saying this. It is what it is.
If you were to go on Facebook and you were to get quotes from the Dalai Lama about how to live your life in a more serene and coexisting manner, I don't think anyone would consider that to be bigotry or racist or anything like that. So I do think there is a large streak of truth, even if it was done as a caricature.
Fair enough.
To get to the point with that one, the idea is, if you have the type of background where you can kind of start over, where you can have not a totally clean slate, you can't erase what you've already done, but if there is a clean break where you have the opportunity to have someone intervene and, show you something that you may not have even come close to thinking about or experiencing. And like I said, the first time where he actually is able to help out, and I think it did help out that monk or whoever, like, it was kind of like, is this something that can really be my life? Like, really? I don't know. It just giving that opportunity, giving that that open door can be so positive. Because when we talk about support systems, the idea is not that it's something that's mandated, although many times it is. It's just that it's something that the person usually hasn't experienced in the way that they're experiencing in the moment. In other words, someone like Emma Frost, you're telling me that's the first time whenever she was teaming with the X-Men or becoming more of a player, you're telling me that's the first time anyone said to her, hey, you probably could do some positive benefits rather than all of the destruction that you're doing. I doubt it. That was like just this one-off sort of thing. She got exposed to it over and over again, sometimes to her own detriment, where she was being pretty much defeated. So it's a two-way street. She had the opportunity where, as a as a person with mental abilities, she could actually see the possibilities of what's going on with other people and realizing that this is not all just my way or the highway. I could possibly have some other benefits if I actually work with others in a way that's not totally selfish and domineering. Like, I say all this with hesitancy because you could, as you pointed out, you could still see some of that in her personality, that it doesn't just completely go away. But at least she gets the feedback from those around her that, yeah, it's definitely better this way. So in that sense, to tie in Hawkeye as well, you're going to need the people around you to still be candid, because I think what happens sometimes is some people try and sugarcoat so much about what's going on or what they want people to do that it just becomes overwhelming and they just reject whatever the person is saying. So is it perfect? No, but it at least acknowledges that, hey, we recognize that you have something to give to the world. Why are you just even questioning, like, why are you doing it this way? Is there another way? It's not always just this, in comics, of course it is, but it's not always this blunt in your face, like, you need to do things this way or else we're gonna pretty much beat the ever-loving tar out of you. So there is no one major theme that I could pick up with each of these. And when we talk about the ones that didn't work, I'm going to say the same thing, which I know is going to make this even muddier. But those are just some of the highlights of what I think kind of sort of worked with each of these, because also this is very writer dependent. Sorry to say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Emma, for one, can be very cool. And I mean that that's not a ice pun or anything along those lines. That's just like a very cold and detached personality. Or she can be more of the vamp, the hot-blooded sex pot type character. It all depends, honestly, again, on who's doing the writing. Same thing with Hawkeye to some extent. I think the Fraction run has definitely colored his character, so he's had a little more consistency since then. But prior to that, he was, I don't want to say all over the map, but again, it was how much of a leader is he? You had the West Coast Avengers run where he was very much a leader, and then some of the, I guess, the late 90s, early 2000s, where he was just sort of there, whether or not they were playing up the deafness. There's a whole mess of stuff. So as you said, and I can't really get into Plastic Man because, again, DC isn't entirely my bag. So I'll leave that to you to dictate how consistently he's been written.
Well, the good news is they made sure that they kept his character as shallow as possible so that he could be comic relief all the time. So I would definitely say there's consistency.
All right. So I guess in a sense, that's a good thing. If at least it's consistently shallow comic relief, as opposed to revamping the character and changing things up. And now you've retconned things and that gets into a whole mess of stuff. So, and I can't entirely say I'm surprised that you said that you couldn't find a common thread among the three examples. And I think that, again, is due to the fact that each of them had to walk their own path. But I think it was important to have that discussion. So before we get into the failures, so to speak, it's interesting that we're bringing this up now because there's a compendium of sorts coming out on Harley Quinn, who we did way back very early on.
Yeah.
And so it's called Harley Quinn Black and White and Red. And it's a series of different stories that are being told. And the Harleen Red is one of the sub-stories in there. And Harley is in Arkham, and she's talking to therapists, and they're trying to figure out what makes her Harley, essentially. And I was looking at the preview here, and the therapist that's working with her is giving her color therapy, some variation on the Lucier color test. And I'm sure this is something that you're much more familiar with. But I just find it interesting that for Harley, who has kind of skirted that line between anti-hero and anti-villain and how good is she? Well, it depends on what the story calls for. And is she in her own book, or is she in a Batman-centric book, etc.? I think she's another character that is interesting to look at. So the fact that this is being brought up now in this, again, I don't want to call it a mini series, but it's like a limited series with like a whole bunch of different chapters by different creative teams that are all going to focus on a different aspect of her character. And this one just popped up this week or last week, as it were, and using the psychiatry and her history with being a mental health professional. And so that is a character that I think is interesting to see what her support systems are. And depending on who she surrounds herself with, I think dictates how good she's going to be. So I guess maybe that's something that you can talk about for a little bit before we get into
that's a great point.
Quote unquote less successful ones.
Yeah, well, at least with that one, I will say there's consistency. It's really basic. Harley ends up taking most of the traits of the people around her. She's a sponge. When she's around the Joker, she becomes this subservient, almost vicious, I don't want to say heartless, but less understanding human being that revels in destruction, revels in chaos. When, I know it's kind of a mini rehash of the episode that we did on her, but when she's with Ivy, she is much more caring. She wants to have a mature relationship. She still can do things that may be considered unethical, but at least she knows where Ivy's coming from, as opposed to Joker, where who knows why. It's just because comics. And then when she actually starts hanging out with people like the Bat Family, or when she's forced to do things, Suicide Squad, or any of the parallel universes where she's forced into an anti-hero role, and she has to be around other people that are trying to save their own world, then all of a sudden you see her improvisation skills, her fighting skills, her energy, her passion, all of it just becomes this entertaining dynamo that really gets the job done. So that's really basic. That comes down to the idea that a more positive and loving fostering environment, in the majority of situations, produce a better situation than a very negative and abusive, horrible, uncaring environment is going to do. It's that simple.
Interesting. So, I definitely want to take a look at this series. They're doing it, I think, digital every week because of the current state of things. So I'm not sure if this was ever in the plans to be a full book, or if they just said, well, we'll just release this digitally because it'll help us maintain sales and readers, et cetera, in the midst of COVID and everything that's going on. So that's something that I'll definitely be interested in checking out. So pivoting then to the less successful cases, and this is, I would say, situations where maybe a hero went bad or a villain tried to rehabilitate themselves, but it didn't stick, etc. And so we've got, again, we'll talk three cases, and we can get maybe a little more in depth into these. But Hal Jordan, who was Parallax, and then the Spectre, among others, Archangel Warren Worthington III, and one of the most famous revolving heel face doors in all of comic books, Magneto. So we'll start with Hal, who I think definitely deserves an episode by himself. But Hal Jordan famously lost his mind. So, well, I hate to be pejorative like that, but he had a break and fully embraced the yellow entity, the yellow fear entity known as Parallax.
But the main thing with that is the idea that where was that fear hidden? It was hidden within, I think it was within the Great Battery, right? Like,
I think so, yes, which is why all the Green Lanterns had the weakness to the color yellow, because Parallax was hiding, so to speak, within the original Green Lantern, the main power battery on Oa.
And the reason why I wanted to interject and bring that up is because this may get a little philosophical, but I think that's important. The Green Lantern Corps is one of the most strongest entities, like organizations that you could imagine. And the idea that they could be brought down by one of their own because of a weakness within their own system that they never actually addressed for years, decades, centuries, however long it was, and it just blows up in their face. I mean, literally, like Hal just destroys everything. He gets all the green rings at one point. He just goes to town in a way that nobody in the DC universe could understand, at least when it was at its apex. And the whole point was, Hal, wait a minute. You have the Green Lanterns itself. You have the Justice League. You have the biggest positive support system. I know we just mentioned that with Harley. You have the biggest positive support system you can imagine. How does something like this ever occur? So what's the failure there? And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about more of the idea of the professional side of a support system. Families always have their flaws. Families are always going to have their ups and downs, their breaking points, and it's the natural part of humanity. But with a situation where you have a structured external organization that has a purpose that may not always incorporate the needs or wants of its own individuals, that can lead to people becoming disgruntled. That can lead to people saying, well, all right, things are great now, but believe it or not, we're kind of seeing that with our current society. We thought, and as a doctor, I thought my job was foolproof. I was never going to be fired. I was never going to be in a bad spot. And yet there were a lot of doctors that pretty much lost everything because of COVID, because there weren't any elective surgeries. There wasn't anything that could be done to earn money. And therefore, even though they put all this training in, they couldn't just turn around and say, okay, well, I'll just get another job doing something else. They had a lot of obligations too. With someone like Hal, the point is you're in a situation where you're supposed to be guarding the universe. You're supposed to be guarding your part of, the known galaxy, whatever. And there's just this itch. There's this thing that wasn't working for you. And someone was able to take advantage of that. Someone was able to manipulate things from the inside. That's not something that any organization really wants to happen. The idea that everything's going to remain the status quo, that everything's going to be exactly the same, is kind of a fallacy. And if you don't prepare for the idea that things are going to change over time, that the needs of the people that you are serving is going to change over time, that's when it starts to fall apart. Because you don't even know at that point what to do because you never even had a plan for it. If you don't plan ahead, if you don't think that, yes, things seem so perfect, they're not going to stay that way. If you don't anticipate the idea that something is going to go wrong and at least have a backup, and even a backup to the backup, then when something happens in someone's life, if you don't, I'm going to bring it very practical. If you don't have what's called an EAP, an employee assistance program, for when your workers are being stressed out and overwhelmed by a pandemic, then you wonder why one of them decides that they're going to, quote unquote, blow the whistle on not having protective equipment, or they're going to complain that they can't work nearly as well as they used to because they're suffering acute stress symptoms. I'm bringing it to real life directly because when we talk about those kinds of supports, it's not that anyone wanted things to fail. And it's not that the system itself wasn't strong. It's just that when we get too closed in on what we do on a daily basis and we have it running so finely tuned that we keep everything at the bare minimum. In other words, we had just enough equipment I'm talking like within the United States. I can't speak for the rest of the world. We had just enough equipment in each building that for each week we could get through. What about if you need it for a month? What if you need it for 6 weeks? What if you need it for 2 months? No one thought about that. So when you had some people that kind of quote unquote went rogue and they just simply said, I can't do this, or they complained, or some doctors even got fired. And I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was fair, but I think overall it was a circumstance that I think parallels to what we're seeing with someone like Hal. I don't think he anticipated that something like this was going to happen, but he was the perfect candidate because what else was he going to do? Things were really shifting because somebody wanted to jump in and because the Lanterns basically figured, well, we got it all sewn up and nobody's ever going to be able to break that barrier. Oh, well, yeah, they did. Spectacularly. And it took a lot to fix that situation with Hal making, no joke, the ultimate sacrifice.
All right, interesting. So moving then to Warren, angel / archangel. He's had a rough go of things. And again, I don't want to say his turn was justified, but I could certainly understand where part of him was coming from with the idea of, I've been given this power now, joining Apocalypse and everything, and I've been given a purpose, etc., and wanting to serve that. So speak a little bit about Warren then.
So this is a situation where I don't want to say it was envy or the grass is greener, just the idea that when people invite you into a situation, or to use the term everyone knows, make an offer you can't refuse, then you really start to weigh it out. And I think that comes down to the idea of, well, what at some point is going to tip the scale? Do you have enough already in your life that you're willing to continue to do what is a heavy, heavy burden? In other words, instead of looking this as a failure, look at this as an opportunity. And this is a strange and perverse way to look at it. You can uphold what is going to probably exhaust you for the rest of your life in a format that you aren't exactly convinced is the proper way to go about things, in a way that many of the people that you're trying to protect don't respect you whatsoever. Or you could have significant levels of control and pretty much free reign over certain decisions. Your responsibilities are only what you make of them. Even though you're answering to one person, you know that as long as they're happy, you're happy. It simplifies things. It's immediate gratification. You can't see it on camera, but basically my hand is just raising, one way while the other one is just dropping to the floor, because when you look at it outside of moral boundaries, that's a very easy choice to make. That's the problem. It got separated from moral boundaries because this may be a little touchy to say, but Angel really didn't have that much invested to begin with. If this truly were that specific to his values, I know the name Angel is so misleading. If it was that specific to his values, then you're not putting things on a scale anymore. That's a big part of this. Priorities. What's most important to you in life? If it's that famous, Jay-Z and you can run the piano riff right now, money, I'm not going to finish it, but, I'm sorry. I'll go with the locks. Money, power, respect. If that's the most important thing to you, then that's easily manipulated. If it's more about the good of the world, and that truly is what's most important to you, then it doesn't really matter what people throw at you. So sorry to say, I don't want to make it sound like it's a moral failing, quote unquote. I'm saying that a person found at a vulnerable point with their priorities being manipulated, it makes it simpler to just go with the quote unquote easy choice. And I forgot who said this, but I think it really pertains. Easy choices, hard life. Hard choices, easy life.
I've seen a thing recently that it said, hard times make soft men then make bad choices lead to hard times make great men make hard choices. I'm mucking it up somehow, but it's the notion.
At this point, I'm saying I think everyone at this point knows what you're trying to say with that. So yeah. Leave it alone.
So then moving to Magneto, then Magneto is again such a fascinating character. He's obviously gone through so much trauma, and his distrust of man is very well founded and certainly rooted in reality and real life psychology and things of that nature. And yet he still sometimes will take the lead with the X-Men. And I know we discussed it back in our episode where we examined the relationship between Magneto and Professor Xavier, but it's that bond that they have, I think, is what brings Eric around to at least temporarily see the light. But why doesn't it stick? Or is that because the writer says it doesn't make for a compelling story?
No, I think that there can be some consistency with Eric helping sometimes and then going back to his typical pattern, because the idea of a support system is you have to allow for the support. Eric is a leading man, and he chews through the scene. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm saying that there are just some people that will always look to be the number one person in the room. And when others are around them, they will make sure that they are the commander. So they're not going to delegate in a way that's going to allow them to have other ways of thinking about a situation. In other words, I dare say sometimes it's a coincidence that Magneto's goals for what he wants for mutant kind sometimes align with all of humanity. And when that happens, then things will go along just swimmingly. They'll be able to defeat whatever the challenge is or whatever foe, and he'll be right there front and center, willing to do everything just as much as anybody else. And he'll dole out some compliments to people that he normally wouldn't. And he will be there to save the butt of anyone that is going to be able to help him in the long run. But as soon as that threat is gone, don't forget what has happened in the past. And don't you dare think that I've forgotten. So it's real simple to turn that on and off when usually the times where we would consider him to be a hero, I hate to say it, but anybody could be a hero because there was no alternative. It's either exist or don't exist. And he's going to choose existence. So that part's not that surprising. I think that the best opportunities still arise with Xavier, and we've discussed that in its own episode. Because at least we know that there was a bond there well before it got to this level of escalation that we see now on a regular basis. It's amazing how the emotional ties that a person makes before they quote unquote make it big can be so powerful compared to all of the major influencers that the person is in their current point in life. So in other words, it's one of those people like, don't forget who brought you to the dance. That old saying. So in that way, he still has that opportunity with the X-Men because of Xavier. Without that, I don't even think that tie would be there. I think it's more purely emergency situations, but otherwise, he's got his own way, his own path, and he's willing to be a support to others. But in terms of him even coming close to thinking that he needs external supports for himself, he doesn't really allow for it, in my opinion, at least the way I've read his character for so long. He's got this.
Does he, though?
I'm not saying that that's truly the way it is. I'm saying the way he presents it, he's got this.
All right. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we go to the break then is the two primary locations that we see in the big two universes are Ravenscroft and Arkham. And we've talked a little bit about, at least we focus primarily on Arkham and the multitude of failures at that particular institution. Ravenscroft is really no better, or at least, not to my untrained, non-expert eye. But what would those locations need from your perspective as a practicing mental health professional, as well as now someone who is, more of an administrator or has some administrative knowledge and experience? What would those locations need in order to be more successful in providing rehabilitation to the villains, and we'll just even say just the out and out villains that are being housed in those facilities? What resources would they need in order to be successful at creating a more lasting and potentially permanent positive change?
Wow.
Kind of a big question, I know, but
yeah.
Go big or go home with these thematic episodes, right?
I have no problem with that. So I don't want to just automatically say the easy thing and say get more money in the budget. That's not the point of this. I do want to say, though, that more resources, but not in the way that we typically think. I'm not talking about more security. I'm not talking about more weapons or things to protect themselves or anything like that. You need more people, and you need more people on a rotating basis. This is one of those situations where part of what happens here is burnout. People are able to do the same job over and over again for years and years with people that have done atrocities, and it's very difficult to empathize with some of the situations that the inmates are dealing with, be it any of the facilities, So from that standpoint, most people come in incredibly idealistic, bright-eyed, and want to do the best they can with people, and they put all of their effort into therapy, one-on-one, groups, all of it. And then someone gets attacked. Or someone just flat out says they don't care. Or someone's sick and now you're doing double the work because you have to make up for someone else that isn't able to be there. All of those things come into play, and what used to be something that energized you at the start of the day is no longer energizing, it's draining. And that makes it more difficult to, first of all, be as effective in your job, but second of all, to make sure that you have the proper emotional distance. And that can work both ways. Some people become incredibly hardened and not nearly as caring, perhaps even destructive. Some people figure, well, if I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound, and they actually start fostering the type of intimate relationships that you really shouldn't. And we've seen that directly with...
That's terrible pot odds.
Yeah. But my point is, I think sometimes we think too much of, okay, if we know let's say one doctor can see this many patients in a day, and this one therapist can lead this many groups in a day, and we just leave it at the base numbers, and we don't really think about the idea that if we want to have a lasting and ongoing system, I don't like the idea of churning people either, but my point is we need to have the flexibility so that people can have downtime. People can recharge. People can have sessions amongst themselves as professionals and be able to regroup rather than the idea of, okay, I'm going to see these same people every day the same way, expecting a different result, because I know it's kind of farcical, but still, that is the colloquial definition of insanity. I think that's one of the major points that has been overlooked by just about every system, be it criminal, be it mental, be it even political. I think we expect of ourselves the idea that we are supposed to take these burdens on to change individuals and sometimes to change a whole city, a whole world with the exact same people for decades on end and wonder why we don't get nearly as much positivity as we should. Just a thought.
Huh. Well, I knew you were going to go. I knew one of the things you were going to suggest was certainly more people, but the rest of it, I think, was certainly enlightening. And I think it's also important to hear as a layperson, and certainly for the majority of our listeners, when we talk about mental health resources and we talk about real life, not comic books, but when we talk about real life and getting resources to these professionals, when we talk about things, I don't like to politicize stuff, but when we talk about stuff like defund the police, that is potentially an issue that can be addressed by some of the things you're discussing, where those resources that were focused on just the police powers can be rerouted to address some of the mental health concerns. And so that perhaps your standard beat cop isn't doing a wellness check, that you have more resources available for mental health to address those folks that need a mental health professional and not a police officer. And so I think when the notion of defund the police gets thrown around, and I'm not entirely defending or promoting the entire notion, but when the idea is discussed, that's at least in part what it's talking about, is the notion that let's stop spending so much of our money on just arresting folks and let's get them treatment. And how do we do that? We need to provide the resources available to those professionals who can do that regularly and with the proper training to ensure that they don't end up with a legitimately criminal situation on their hands. And so I think that was very informative and very eye-opening as a way to look at some of the real life scenarios that we're dealing with. But in any case, let's take a quick break. We're going to plug a couple shows, and then we get back. We will get into some of the more real life corollaries. So stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Linda.
And I'm Jane.
And we have a brand new podcast called Bedknobs and Broomflicks, where we talk about witches of the entertainment world. From the horror movies Warlock, Suspiria, The Witch, and The Blair Witch Project,
to the more comedic or whimsical, such as Harry Potter, Hocus Pocus, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and The Blair Witch Project.
No movie, TV show, or book is off limits.
All witches, man witches, sorry warlocks, we're not calling you that, witches brews, witches of history, familiars, and witch-like activity will be discussed as we laugh and have fun talking about the wonderful world of witches.
So join us every other week for some fun witchy talk.
All witches welcome.
Have you ever been reading through a stack of comics and thought, maybe I should see what this Arkham Asylum game is all about? Or been playing Marvel vs. Capcom and felt like you were at a real disadvantage since you didn't know who half the characters were? Well, Play Comics is the show for you. I'm Chris, and each episode we take a look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that source material. So whether you know the comics and want to know how all these games work, or you know the games and want to find out where all this craziness came from, go check out Play Comics at playcomics.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Hi, I'm Gail Simone, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So I think that the discussion that we had right before the break was good because it ties into the question that I wanted to ask. Again, since this is a thematic episode, there's not going to be treatment per se, nor is there going to be a skip. But what we can do is talk about some of the corollaries to real life and what are some of the parallels that we can look at the way that these characters have been handled, and how can we use some of these topics and suggestions in real life to address recidivism.
Okay.
And again, I know that ties into a little bit about what we were discussing with more resources and everything, but aside from the notion of more money and more people, what are some of the other things that can be done to address that?
Right. I think first there has to be a recognition that as much as we would love to say that we have a way to force that type of change, we really don't. So there is a part of this that will always come down to the individual wanting to have something different than what they have now in terms of their behaviors, their thought patterns, and their actions. If they don't want that, then that makes it much more difficult. And then we look back to the idea of purely punishment as opposed to what we would call rehabilitation. So I'll just acknowledge that up front so that we can get to the real heart of the matter. While this may sound controversial, it's not meant to be. The closer that we can model things towards legitimate family and friendship, even though that's not what professional support systems are, then I think the better we'll be. In other words, the genuine idea that you are with this person and providing for them some of the needs that they wouldn't be able to have otherwise. Because when we think of support systems traditionally, we really are thinking of the family unit. We're thinking of parental figures, perhaps people that are more on your level with siblings, and then maybe even younger generation where you are now a mentor to them. The idea that is that it's its own self-perpetuating system. There's a clear necessity of someone that's going to be in charge, someone that's going to be leading, someone that's going to be right there with you, often having similar, if not the same experiences, or even a variety of experiences that you can continue to grow and learn from. And the idea that you're going to continue to foster that with people in the future based on what you've learned. If you can get that chain going, then that's really the type of support system that can work. I know I'm going to go ahead and use what's considered a failure with Hal Jordan when Parallax hit, but the idea of the Green Lantern Corps and the idea that there are people that are always going to have to be within that system that are going to have to step up to the plate. And when you do, we'll show you what it is that you need to do. And then from there, you know that at some point you're going to have to work with these people and you're going to have to show them what to do. And then at some point, you know that the people that you taught are going to continue to teach, et cetera, et cetera. I think when you have that in place, then you're going to have consistent results. So within this, we could talk about substances. We could talk about the idea that people that quote unquote are considered criminals because it's against the law to use certain things. They end up in an environment where they may not understand exactly what it is that they're supposed to be doing. But once you all of a sudden get them connected with things like AA or NA, or now we are in a position where we have trained professionals that also may have a history of a substance use background that can understand it greater than I ever could. And therefore make a deeper connection than, anybody else, regardless of what the degrees are. So when you have that part of it, in addition to that, you have what was their original family unit, obviously wanting them to get help. And you tie that into it because now they have a motivation, be it for their children or be it for their parents or their siblings or whatever. In addition to that, when you have, I think I mentioned EAP, but when you have a workplace program, perhaps that is separate from their employer, but still allows for them to have something that they don't have to, it's understanding of their schedule, so they don't have to miss work for the sake of still getting a therapy session here and there. It's much more integrated when you look at all of these pieces that would come together and create a cohesive unit that the person can understand. And of course, I'm going to be biased and say, if you necessarily need to add a doctor or a psychologist or someone that takes the lead of the group in terms of on a one-on-one basis, obviously I would deal with medications if that person needs it, et cetera, et cetera. You add all of that together, and now you're talking about a structure that actually makes it very hard to fail. It's very difficult if you have biological people on one hand that are rooting for you, in addition to people that have gone through what you've gone through that may not be biologically related, but are right there in the meetings with you and telling you how long they've been, doing well. In addition to the idea that at some point, if you get enough sober time, I'm just continuing with the substance use example. You have enough sober time when you get your token. Now you're going to bring in someone else to their first meeting and help them understand. In addition to the idea that you still have your workplace program that that your employer understands that isn't giving you extra pressure to do more shifts because they know that you're working on improving yourself so that you're better at work anyway. When you add all of that together, how do you fall through the cracks? It could still happen. I'm not saying it won't, but I am saying that it's simpler for people when those setbacks happen, that they're going to be able to make them small setbacks instead of gigantic ones and completely fall off the map. That's my thought. In an ideal world, I recognize that it's not all ideal, but none of the things that I've mentioned are things that exist in comics. They're not. What I mean is they're not just based in a fantasy. Every single point that I just mentioned is an interaction that I do on a daily basis in my current job. So it's not as if the pieces aren't there. It's not as if the system isn't there. We have a lack of coordination. Many times these things are in their own individual spheres that don't really interact nearly as much as they should. And when that happens, that actually gives an opportunity for the person, the client, the patient, whatever, to manipulate the system. They can tell one person, yeah, sure, I'm doing well. I'm taking my meds. I'm not suicidal right now. Meanwhile, they tell one person they consider to be close in their family, by the way, I was thinking of killing myself just last week. But I can't tell my therapist that because they'll want me hospitalized. And then meanwhile, at the work environment, they're pointing out that your numbers are down this month. What's going on? And if you don't bring it up, then we might consider laying you off. In which case, that's going to lead to worsening mood. That's the other way. That's the flip side. And it's not because anyone was trying to be malicious with any of it. And yet, I'm going to be honest, I think that's the more common reality than the one that I originally described.
Oh, definitely.
So that's my take on how we can address these things. I don't think we need magic miracle cures that don't exist. I think we need to actually take the time to figure out how we coordinate the proper pieces we already have.
Well, to your point about coordination, there are so many factors to be taken into consideration, at least with your potential hypothetical about impacting work and so on and so forth. How do you communicate that how do you communicate between work and your healthcare provider without violating something like HIPAA?
HIPAA, right.
Without getting into those ethical discussions where now you are, potentially penalizing somebody for disclosing their health concerns if an employer knows that an employee is going through, is having difficulty with their mental health struggles. How can you ensure that they won't be penalized in some fashion? I mean, we see that all the time with women that are pregnant. I mean, alone, that's not even a mental health thing, just that women that
I would argue that pregnancy always includes a mental health component, both for the good and the bad. I'm just saying.
No, I'm not arguing that either. My point is just that, I mean, with something as simple and as physically obvious as a pregnancy is, not that certain mental health struggles can't have physical aspects, but very, very few women can hide a pregnancy. And I'm not saying that in like a pejorative sense. I'm just saying that realistically, it's very difficult to hide a pregnancy. And so we've kind of reached a point now where I think it's illegal to ask, are you getting pregnant anytime soon? I mean, we're pushing for family leave, and even that is a struggle in and of itself.
Yep.
But you open up such a Pandora's box of potential issues when you start commingling the employment with mental health and those sorts of things coming together, because they want very different things. Obviously, the employee wants to get healthy. They want the care and resources that they need. The employer needs to make money, and they need that employee working efficiently. Now, obviously, in the long run, it's in the employer's best interest that the employee be an effective, efficient employee, which obviously involves getting their mental health taken care of. But in that moment, those two things are at odds. And I don't know how you address that. That's a discussion, frankly, for a human resources podcast. That's not really the topic for something like our show, but it is something when you were speaking that I was spinning in my head. I'm going, well, that all sounds nice, but thinking as a lawyer who doesn't even cover healthcare law, but just knowing what I know of HR practices and the sort of general understanding of things, that's a can of worms that I don't know how you resolve that without massive amounts of not just legislation, but there's going to be litigation over it. You're going to need to retrain entire workforces, and you also have to eliminate certain biases in basic human individuals, which is never going to go away. So regardless, you can have all the best intentions in the world, you're still going to end up in hell. So
fair enough. I will say this. I think HIPAA has been distorted at times where it's actually done significant damage. I've had situations where the bottom line is I wasn't allowed to provide information to outside providers, and vice versa, that we wanted to reach out to providers and they said, well, we need the patient to sign a release, and the patient refused to sign. And okay, you have your black box with this patient, I have mine, and I hope that they're both good. That's not productive in my opinion. I really do think that there is a level of, I hate to use the term common sense, but that's the best thing I could come up with, because I think ultimately what is good for a person is way more important than what's good for a policy. Wow, I know I can get in trouble saying that, but I just, I can't help it. That's why I got into this field in the first place. Also,
I'm not arguing with you at all.
Right. I mean, but even to speak to some of the things that you mentioned a huge change in legislation, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's fascinating, though, in general, there are so many rabbit holes. Should things like healthcare be tied to employment to begin with? But also,
we just had that discussion with the Avengers.
Right. But also the idea that if I walk into work and I have a heart attack, I file for disability, no one bats an eye. You have to go through a lot of red tape and paperwork, et cetera, but no one really questions that. The second that someone says, I'm going through a depressive episode, now all of a sudden it's just nothing but fear. It's fear on all ends. It's fear on the person saying it, saying, oh my goodness, should I have even said that? It's usually the employer also saying, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, I want to acknowledge that this person needs help, but at the same time, how do I navigate this? At least though, with all other healthcare, there is that divide. Like no one even comes close to questioning the other ones. They may question how long, but other than that, it's like, yeah, you got to do your thing. Not with mental health. It's still a shame. I know that's our job to destigmatize, but I mean, that is the one area I'll say where it is now still to this day, loud and clear. You want to know where you stand? I'm not advocating this, okay? Let's just make this clear. I'm saying this for a dramatic effect. You want to know where you stand? Tell your employer you have a mental illness and see what happens. And I'm actually fearful even just uttering that, because don't do it. I'm being honest. Don't do it, because I think the consequences can be more negative than positive depending on who your employer is. The fact that I still have to have that fear, that's not right.
Preach. Yeah. It's and again, to your point, that's why we have this show, is to destigmatize things. But I mean, you know, the folks that we reach, I know, enjoy that, but our sphere of influence is limited. That's a whole other topic, but more germane to the point. I mean, we see so many times that the way we talk about mental health is so vastly different from the way that we talk about physical health. And until we start talking about mental health and physical health as personal health in the same umbrella, in the same mindset, things aren't going to change. We're still going to end up with, oh, I've been depressed. You just have to get through it. Well, smile. That'll help. Pills aren't going to help you, whatever. Any number of ridiculous excuses that folks come up with to justify looking down on mental health concerns is not as important as physical health concerns.
And to get a little bit more on track with what Matt obviously was talking about with the theme of this and everything, I think the idea that you can have organic support systems within your current situation can be incredibly powerful. I know I was just ragging on the idea of employers and how that thing works. I want to point out some of the positive too. My employer specifically, but also I know plenty of other employers, they do have wellness programs. They do have opportunities even during the day for people to do things that are considered, positive mental health and emotional activities that can benefit everyone around them and foster a better environment. So I know that it's happening. I'm just frustrated that it's at a glacial pace. And so if that's going to be the continuation, then rather than waiting for those things to get to the level that they should be, pointing out that there really are dedicated societies. For example, NAMI. The fact that we have organizations that really do the grassroots work of making sure that people understand for whatever particular thing you're going through are out there, that is way more important than anything that we were just talking about. Making those individual connections within those groups, absolutely amazing. Life-saving even. So I wanted to acknowledge that. For example, we've mentioned before, like with first responders, there's something called Cop to Cop for police officers who are going through depression or suicidal situations. There's plenty of opportunities within whatever it is. If it's ethnicity, if it's by sexual orientation, if it's by anything, any particular topic, it doesn't matter. There are people that are willing to support you in how you're feeling and what types of reactions that may elicit. Or when you don't think you have the support within your inner circle of people that you have to deal with on a daily basis. And technology has made that even better, I think. Not the idea that you only do it that way, but the idea that you can now foster these groups across state lines, across national lines. You can reach out to people anywhere at any time and find that type of connection to keep you going just a little longer.
Yep. I mean, we have resources in our Discord. Our friends over at Guardian MH have created the real-time support bot that is now on Discord and Twitch. There are any number of resources, and we talk about that, regularly at the top of the show and our outro. It's part of the disclaimer that, talk to a mental health provider, talk to someone, and we can certainly, I think, do a little bit better job from our end of sharing those resources. But certainly we've we don't hide from them, and we don't shy away from offering those support systems to our listeners or to anybody. Doesn't matter who it is. If anybody needs help, there are people out there who can help. I've myself answered a couple calls just from friends, from acquaintances, really, not even close friends, just people that I knew, but that knew my struggle. And because of my openness in discussing my history and the things that I've gone through, they felt comfortable in contacting me and saying, hey, I know Anthony would be a good person to talk to because he's been through that. And it was very powerful to me to have those kinds of connections with people. And I'm glad to say that the people that have called me are all still living, and they're all still here with us. I'm not so presumptuous as to say that I saved them or that I was the one to talk them off the ledge, but I helped. And that means more to me than anything else. So to our listeners and to anybody else who happens to catch this, either watching or on Discord or what have you, you are not alone. And to borrow the words of good friend Kate over at Ignorance is Bliss, you matter. And it's the truth. You do matter to us and to someone out there. That's just how it is. You matter, and there are resources available. So to that end, we hope that you can find the support system in your life that helps keep you going. I know Doc is obviously part of my support system, just as I know I'm part of his. And so I guess that's that. I don't really know where else to go with that other than just to continue rambling on. But in any case, I that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. So no recommended reading for this week, not that I can think of.
Nah.
But I will say the call to action then is talk to your friends. Talk to them about your struggles, because I'm sure if you start that discussion, I would hope that it fosters a greater understanding, and maybe somebody will share something with you that you didn't expect, and we can all start to support each other. That if you were the person to get that discussion going in your circle of influence, then someone else may come forward, that may give the strength to someone else to come forward and say, I've really been having problems lately, and you can help each other. You don't have to shoulder the burden entirely yourself, but if everybody helps lean on everybody else, we all stand. And I think that's very important. So that's our call to action this week, is have those discussions with your own support systems. So next week's episode is the character redacted. Very excited about this one. Very excited to talk about this very big name character that we have not yet tackled. But I don't even know how this got started, but now I feel at this point we can't back down from it because we made it into a thing. So now it's just a secret character. I don't even think we're going to live stream the recording session. We'll do it.
Nice.
And that'll be that. And then you won't know who it is until next week when it releases, and you'll see issue 87 character name, and you go, oh my God, I can't believe they did this character. So looking forward to that. Then Eeyore. Thank you, Brian.
Stop that. Stop downplaying it.
Then Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Oh, goody.
It is going to be good, man. Seriously.
And then Reader from the Inhumans, a certainly lesser known character, but Ruby likes to make her offbeat picks every once in a while. So I'm looking forward to this. It's certainly going to be a short read because the character has been in like 30 issues total, maybe. So certainly not going to be difficult to get the appropriate amount of research done on that episode. So thank you again to our new patron, Dan. Thank you so much, Bird. I'll see you at poker. Thank you again to Jacob for your fantastic words, and thank you, EmeraldGod, for your amazing review. You can review us on iTunes and Podchaser and maybe Stitcher. I think one or two of the other major platforms that do allow it, but I know Apple Podcasts and Podchaser are the two big ones. So if you leave us a review, we'll read it on the show. You can email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Our website is capesonthecouch.live. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. And we've got a TeePublic store, and which was not on sale last week. I got an email like late the day before. It was like Tuesday night going, oh, sorry, we've actually been kind of swamped with our orders we can't offer you the sale that we had. So I apologize for last week telling everybody, hey, go to our TeePublic sale and go to our TeePublic site. Everything is on sale. And it wasn't. So unfortunately, I didn't get that notification until well after the episode had been recorded, and it was already in the pipeline for release. So apologies, but the store is still up, and you still can get cool stuff with our logo and the Why Because Comics logo on it. So that's going to do it for me. Doc, any parting words?
I don't have any parting words per se that are going to make the main episode, but I just have to get this out because this thing's about support. This is a song, if you've ever seen the show Boondocks. I just got to do this because it's a theme by Ashiru. I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies sing the blues. I'm the spark that makes your idea bright, the same spark that lights the dark so that you can know your left from your right. I am the ballad in your box, the bullet in your gun, your inner glow that lets you know to call your brother son, the story that just begun, the promise of what's to come, and I will remain a soldier till the war is won. Sorry. Just had to do that.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. That was cool. Certainly a hell of a lot better than the turtle power I spit last week. So, for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.